Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for training KPIs that will impress your boss. We've had a really positive response for this webinar, and at the end of the year, I can see why. We are all scrambling to try to show all of the metrics and data of everything that we've done for the year and also planning for the next year. So, hopefully, this is timed well. And yes, it will be recorded, and you will have access to it following this webinar. We will send it within 48 hours along with some resources and tools that are referenced during the course of the session. You will be muted during this session, and if you have questions, please enter them into the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Also, a couple of other housekeeping items. If you if your control panel is obstructing your view, just hit the orange icon with the arrow in the upper left of the control panel to make it go away. And also, we will have a few polls during the session. And from feedback on our last webinar, we are going to spread them out. So we're going to spread the love. So it'll be a little bit more fun and interactive. We can see how everyone else is doing with their KPIs, how everyone is planning their metrics, and so on. So it should be a fun session, and I hope you all participate. Joining today is Jason McMurray, our Chief Customer Officer, who is also going to co-present and has a lot of information around how Mindflash customers are using data and building KPIs, and also using metrics that can show the impact of training. And he has a lot of information around some reporting suggestions and so on. And we're really excited to have him join today.
Hello, everyone.
So today, what we're going to cover are, first of all, goal setting, which is, the most important thing, which you will hear me say lots of times, probably over the course of a number of webinars, is that we have to start with the end in mind. And that means, starting with measurable goals that will help us to keep track and keep focus. Also, we're going to cover building KPIs and how to do that in a way that demonstrates the performance in general, but in particular, since this session is around training. We're going to cover training KPIs, and I have a set of KPIs that are kind of unique, and I've talked to several of our customers and other people who are training, and this is a number one question because there are some basic ones which we'll go into, or I'll call them general training KPIs, but then there's a number of KPIs that could be specific to an industry or to a group of people that you're training or audience. So stay tuned for that. We also have presenting data, which is around strategies for presenting data in a compelling way. And this is a job, guys. I know for myself, regardless of what I'm presenting, it's something that goes back to point number one, which is goal setting. And it starts with the plan. And that even goes even as deep as thinking about what you want to convey at the end of your presentation. And we're going to cover a quick couple tips to help you do that effectively. And then we have a few resources that should also help you to track, measure, and report training effectiveness, and also to create some of the data visualizations that you will actually see during the course of this presentation. And last, we're going to cover a little bit of a deeper dive into reporting and advanced training reporting as we have done it and some of our customers have done it. So you'll hear a couple of customer testimonials or stories and how you can implement them for yourself. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right into building goals for your training. Something that struck me is just the power of goal setting, even around anything in particular, not just for training or for business. But people who write down their goals are more likely to accomplish them by 42%. So I think of that, and I always remind myself of what the importance of planning and goal setting really is. We all have a better chance of getting the desired outcome when we plan ahead of time. And so that's why it's so important for us to build a set of training outcomes and to think about it as we're creating our content. And so some of you have already seen this, but this is just a brief overview around how to build a successful goal, or to think about goal setting, and that is with SMART goals. So be specific, make sure that the goals are measurable and are attainable, which means you can actually reach them when you do shoot for them, that they are relevant and useful, and then that they are time based, meaning that you have a set time or deadline for you to accomplish those goals. And those are, key ingredients for just building a good structure for a goal. So now we're going to actually run one of our first polls and talk through some of the training statistics. And this is around the percentage of time that is being spent. So I'm going to launch it and we'll have 20 seconds. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'm going to share the results. It looks like mostly everyone on this call is spending less than 10% of their time in planning KPIs, which is great to know because, I mean, we're all in good company. And it's so funny because I actually sat on the plane with a trainer coach, and he builds his entire life around helping people spend more time planning. And I thought it was really interesting because one of his tidbits was that he believes that people should spend 25% of their time planning, and then they'll be more effective, and he has proof points and things around that. So even myself, I'm trying to apply some of these personally and as well as in business. But the reality is we're all busy, we all have a whole list of things to do. This is my life. Even as a marketer, there's so many things to do, so many things to juggle, and sometimes it can get a little ahead of us. But it is so important to just, once again, to have something written down that you can check back into, and then that will help you as a reference, and then you can think about your timeline. And sometimes you may not have someone who is holding you accountable to that timeline, but the timeline itself can be helpful just to keeping you on track. Okay, so I'm gonna hide those results, and understanding KPIs. This is something that I know a lot of people, especially as we're getting more into the corporate arenas, may not have had particular experience with, and that is, a KPI versus just a general metric. But a KPI is the measurement or the metric that helps to determine if you're meeting organizational goals and objectives. And they let management know how effectively uh, it's being, the process and procedures and people are performing. And I think that it's really important to feel confident about what we're putting in front of our management. But what if we are the management team? It's still something that helps us as a benchmark, and it's really good to just have something in place to help keep us, accountable, and to help us see our success. So, how do you build a KPI that is like a strong KPI? Well, here are a few attributes. Number one, a KPI absolutely must be aligned with business objectives. And I think this is how we level up and position ourselves as business leaders, is that we're thinking about what are the overall, strategies and goals for the company. I mean, it should even ladder all the way up to the mission and vision of the company, which you'll see on a later slide. but then they should be crystal clear. This is where you have no doubt what exactly your focus is and what the outcomes should look like. So, getting it in writing and again, setting those smart goals and having, an outcome that is expected is a really important step. So, number three, it should be easily tracked and measured. And that's something that it seems like it's obvious, but sometimes we might want to capture a dimension of data and be able to present on it, but it may be data that's inaccessible or things like that. So that's the reason why when we start the building process for those data points, we need to make sure that they are attainable back to the SMART goals. Can we actually deliver on this KPI and measure it effectively? And then the last one is stakeholder agreement. I think this is a really good one. It could almost be number one, but the fact of the matter is that there are a number of stakeholders in every business, and sometimes it's not just the person who you report to. It may be someone who has to support getting the data for you. So if your data is in different systems or things like that, then you need to have a plan. And one thing that I have used when I've worked in matrix environments is something called a DAISY, which I will share some links for you after this session. It really does help. It's how you structure sort of accountability around a project or an idea. And I think this is a really good way when you have people who you work with, where there's dotted line reports and all of these different ways that the business is structured. So this is the slide that I mentioned earlier where it helps you to kind of visualize, from the very top all the way down. And I always mention that, these goals should ladder down from the very top. So, you know, again, what we need to think about is number one, the business mission and vision to provide the best customer service in the industry might be an example of that. If your company is extremely customer centric, and so you would want to take that and apply that holistically across your programs or the things that you are wanting to accomplish in the business. The next set of things to consider are the strategic goals, and those are usually done annually. And that an example of that might be to grow up sales by 25% if we're still going with the customer service example. Another one might be position the company as a leader in customer service. So these are the strategic goals, and you can see that if you start to ladder down your business KPIs and your program KPIs so that they map back to these, you are actually just essentially setting yourself up to support the business objectives, and you're really being a champion for those. And I think that that's a great way to position yourself as a partner to people, even to your manager or to other business leaders. And I think it's recognized when you do that work. So another thing is to think about your audience, or in your business, it might be your department, or it might be a group of customers, or it might be a group of partners. Who are you training, or who actually has the need for this training? And then think about how you can structure your goals around those audience members. So in this case, one of the things, an example that we could use here is that it could be like the customer service representatives or managers, and you have a question that you need to ask yourself in order to think about the metrics for success. And one of those questions in this case could be, how do we know if we've been successful? And I'd say this is the number one question that we always need to ask ourselves when we're building KPIs. How do I know if I've done a good job or if the goal has been met? And then think about how that can be structured in a measurable outcome or metric. Again, I will have a template for you following this session that helps you answer those questions and even gives you a few suggestions on potential metrics and outcomes. So I think one example of an answer to that question could be, um, it could come down to looking at how well the customer service representatives understand the product. Because if the goal for the company is to do a better job of positioning themselves as a leader in customer service, then you would want to make sure that your customer representatives or your CSMs are prepared and armed with the information that they need to help people when they have questions about the product or things like that, for example. It could also be as simple as a customer service satisfaction um, score. So you might have a net promoter score or different things that you measure as a positive sign of how you are performing. And you can think about how you can bring those dimensions of data and track it back to training and think about those around the outcomes. So the last section of this is around goals and outcomes. And this one I think is really an important one that a lot of times can be missed, which is first you have an outcome, which is the obvious point. For example, you might want to see a score of 95% or better on product knowledge quizzes, for example, in your training courses, right? Um, or you might want to see improved survey results regarding customer service interactions. But the next step, which is the step that is often missed around those outcomes, is having a plan around uh, how you ensure that the goals are met. It's kind of an action plan potentially for course correction or to keep everything on course. So for example, it might be rewarding people as they reach certain benchmarks in process for accomplishing the goals, or it might be a targeted training session with those people who didn't pass with the 95% score or higher. So thinking about the goal setting in the context of not just, hey, I want to have a 95% score, but also having a plan of record for how you can accomplish that in addition to just the training. Okay, so what happens if we don't quite hit it or if we start seeing us trail off? So it's kind of already being on the defensive and planning in advance. So, good KPIs, again, I just want to reiterate this last point. Good KPIs ladder down from the corporate mission and business goals. And I have to say again that the bottom line is if you successfully build KPIs that are aligned with the strategic goals of the business, you'll inevitably support your manager's objectives as well. And I think that's why we're all here is so that we can actually do a good job and impress our bosses and get raises and promotions and et cetera, or mostly just to build out a really strong training program that gets results. And I think that that also comes with its share of positive feelings and fuzzies. So now let's go on to some of the training KPIs. So one thing that we consistently probably all have seen is some of these learner performance KPIs. You're tracking their attendance, completion rates, pass and fail rates, and time to completion. But again, this is about training KPIs that are a little bit beyond what is typical. And so, what I would say is that what would be more impactful would be rather than just attendance to have an option to compare attendance against performance. So of the people who attended, we saw better performance in sales in selling this most recently released product. So then you now have some benchmarks that you can say, hey, if we see people who attend, if attendance is high, then we're going to have higher sales, for example. So what you're doing is in the blue section over here of general training KPIs, what we're seeing is like you're just presenting data. And I'll show some examples of this and then I'll actually show some other examples of how you could possibly show it in a more visual way or make them more impactful results that you're showing. So rather than just presenting a set of data, which is what I would categorize as the general training KPIs, you are actually showing a storyline for what that data actually means and what the impact has been on either the training program, on the attendees who or participants, and or just on the business in as a whole. So I think it's really important to think about it as what is the story arc. So you're thinking about the entire how you're presenting it and telling a story and how the data can be more meaningful. So rather than just completion rates, for example, you're going to look at all of the people who completed this. We saw better performance of X, or likewise around the pass and fail rates. People who scored higher than this percentage had X performance. And so on, all the way down to, rather than just how long did it take, well, what was the outcome for people who were able to get through the training faster or slower or whatever it was. You might see that people who rushed through it had worse performance, and people who took their time had better performance. So there's ways that you can think about the data and just more of a way of how is it meaningful? What does it mean, rather than just showing the numbers in general? So there's a similar example around the trainer performance KPIs, which I won't really go into too much detail, but in general, you can see there's the basic ones, and then there's a how you can tell a story with it. So rather than cost of training, what about the ROI of training? Like, what was the return on investment after you paid the price? So here's an example of one of the sets of data. I think every one of us has seen this slide. I've seen this slide around my career. I may have even built this slide before I've started getting better at presenting data in a more meaningful way. But there's nothing wrong with this slide in general. But I think the question is, does it actually tell a story? Is there a very clear story? Are we very specific about what the message is? Or is this a slide that I have to give everyone in the room 5 minutes to digest, or I have to really talk to it so people get it? And I think that as you start to, you know, present data for a more executive audience, you are going to find that the amount of time that they want to spend processing information usually is a little bit smaller, just because they are pulled in so many different directions and have many meetings and things like that. So being efficient and being effective in those meetings is really a powerful thing in more than one way. So whoops, sorry, just went a little faster than I thought. Hang on here. All right, sorry about that. So here's another example, and I think this is a fun way of presenting data, and this is just like one example. Of course, you can do it in so many different ways, but presenting data in a visual way is really important. I actually recently saw a stat that showed that um, I think something like 65% of people are visual learners, and I actually have more data on that later on in this presentation. But I think the most important thing is to decide what is the most important thing. So for the partner training attendance stats, rather than just showing the set of data, I thought it was more important to show that over the quarter we saw improvement in attendance for the most part, and that we also, are seeing a trend line of registrations as well. And whatever the story is, this was just an example, but whatever your story is, that should be the most prominent aspect of the slide. And if you have to break it up into more than one slide, I think that's okay if it enriches the data and the context of the story. So now we're going to go ahead and take another poll. So the question is, what is your biggest reporting challenge? And we'll have about 20 seconds to participate. I'll give you a countdown when we're close to closing the poll. We got 2 seconds left, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like many of us, it's about a tie here on the biggest reporting challenge, which is not sure where to start, and there's too many sources of data to tell a single story. And I think that resonates probably with a lot of us. And I think you're going to hear later on with Jason's section that there are some ways to simplify that experience so that you can easily tell the story that you want to tell. So I have one more poll that I'm going to show here, and that is, what do you hope to achieve with strong KPIs? 5 seconds left, and we're going to close the poll. And here are the results. Looks like mostly everyone wants to prove the value of training to their boss. And I think that could probably go for so many different, there could be so many different reasons why that is. And I would love personally to know some of these answers myself. But I think in the end, we all have a certain level of satisfaction of knowing that we've done a good job. And hopefully, I really do hope that by the end of this session, you have found some things useful. You found at least one metric that you can use for yourself, or a tool or a resource that's also helpful. So I'm sorry that this slide is not more agreeable, but I just have it as a quick review for all of us to just, know that there are a number of training KPIs that we could use, and they could go all the way around from, a particular audience or an industry. And I think that it's really important to think about that. You guys will have a chance to digest this, and I'm actually going to share this with you. And again, it will be also a part of one of the tools and resources that I will leave behind after this session. But a couple of things that I think that we could just quickly highlight are around the customer product training, for example. And I think Jason also has a number of different points that he also may have to share on this one. But I think one of the things that we've seen is that customer training is becoming such a an emphasis. There's so much emphasis on customer experience, customer training, customer service, because we're starting to see that with competition and all the disruption in the market, that customer experience is what keeps customers coming back, and it's becoming more and more and more important. So we're seeing more and more people are training their customers, and more companies are training their customer service teams. And some of the things that we have been able to help some of our customers with is to actually be able to draw a line from their training to the actual customer conversions or customer retention and satisfaction statistics. So I think there are a number of different ways that you could look at this data. And, if you switched over to, for example, the channel partners and resellers, you know, it's really important to make sure that they're getting their bookings and that they have their opportunities, that they're using the PRM solution that you have in house, or the CRM, or whatever tool that you are using to have them log their leads, that they know how to do it. So order tracking and fulfillment and processing rates might be something that you use in there after you've trained them on how to do it effectively and how to do it the right way. So there's a whole bunch of different nuggets in here, and I won't go into this too much. But Jason, did you have anything to add?
I'll actually cover a fair amount of this as we go into the next section, but I think the important thing here is you're starting with what is the outcome we'd like to see, and then how do we set up our training and, more importantly, the reporting to give us the insight that we need to determine whether or not that was successful. And I'll talk through a couple of examples of how people have done that.
Cool. All right, and we have one more poll really quickly. And the question is around how you currently manage your training data. Okay, looks like we're all using spreadsheets. There are a few of us who have learning management systems. Love to know how that is working and how the reporting and the dimensions of data are done there. And then there's a few other systems. And I would love it if anyone wanted to throw a few chats in of what those other systems might include, because I'm sure that there's a number of things. I'm guessing maybe some homegrown CRMs or I don't know. I'm just really curious. So if you're using one and you're interested in sharing, it'd be great to see it in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to hide those results. And I am just going to show you guys a few more examples of how to present the data, and then we're going to jump right into Jason's portion of the presentation. So, a few tips for presenting the data. This is the stat that I mentioned to you. Again, 65% of people are visual learners. And I think that that really means a lot. And I think that that's the reason why using tools to help us represent the data in a visual way is really important, even more now that we are seeing, data being more and more important in our everyday lives in general. So, number one, we need to let data tell the story. And again, do it in a visual way. So use visuals whenever possible and focus on the main message. Just like I mentioned in the example slide earlier, you want to make sure that you're not trying to present so many messages in a single set of data or in a single slide. You want to just have one main message. The main message is that we grew our sales pipeline by X% after training. And I think that if there's a really strong focus on those metrics and the story arcs of all of these data presentations, it will be a more meaningful conversation. And you will start to see that you have, leverage to do other things like get request budget or to expand your programs or to enrich other programs. So I'm going to trail back to the original slide that I showed earlier, where there was first a random data set, and then we represented the data as a visual. And here's another way. Maybe it's really important to show how how training participation looks around the world, and who are the most or which are the most active countries. And so here's an example of, I think, a slide that represents data very well. You can see which countries have the highest partner training participation. But also, just again, you'll see on my list of tools that there are a number of ways that you can create these slides. It didn't take me very long at all because I did have the right set of tools and they're easy to use. And I'm just getting ready to share those with you now. So, a few helpful tools that I found really useful are number one, it's kind of out of order, but PictoCharts is kind of one of my favorites. It's really a way of showing a graphic and making something really pretty. So, you can find icons or you can set up infographics or build PowerPoint presentations or slide presentations. Um, then you also have Tableau, which is actually a data visualization tool, and they have a free version. It allows you to bring data together and try to show it in different ways. Also, you have some really cool presentation tools like PowerPoint Keynote or Google Slides, and there are so many um, tools and templates out there that are free. And, you can think about it in the context of what you're trying to achieve and even just do a simple Google search, for example, comparative slides. And you might find a list of slides that show comparison in a really good visual way, and then you can take and build on that. And the last one that we're going to cover a little bit more in detail is the learning management systems. And that's going to be what Jason's going to cover a little bit more in detail. He's going to explain what a learning management system is and how you can take different dimensions of training and reporting metrics, business metrics, and bring them together to get a more impactful story. Uh, and here is the example that I mentioned about the training planning tool. If you were on the Build Content Like a Pro, this is the same, but I have added a few extra success metrics so that it can be a little bit more enriched so that you can think about it from the context of your particular business and your outcomes. It comes with instructions on how you can load in a drop down menus and things like that, and hopefully it's a useful tool as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jason.
Great. So I'm going to talk through a couple of things. Just a quick reminder, if you do have any questions about this or anything else related to Mindflash, we're happy to answer those. So you can ask questions on the right-hand side there if you have anything you want us to clarify. What I'll do here is I'll talk through a couple things. The first is I'll give you a quick example of one of Mindflash's customers that has been very successful in creating KPIs and actually achieving many of their KPIs. So I'll talk through what those are, and then I'll launch into kind of some of the tools that you have and some of the things to keep in mind as you're setting up your data for analysis of your program and using your various reporting tools, things like that. So to start off with Orion, so Orion, just some background on Orion. It's a SaaS software company that their mission is to empower investors to build better businesses. And they do this by offering a wide range of products and services to investment advisors and their firms. While they are a software example, their use is very consistent with a lot of our customers. So whether you're a software company, a medical device company, or any of the other various segments that we see, their situation is very common. So I think you'll probably be able to get something out of this, even if it's not you're not a software company. To start off, just to give you some background on a learning management system, a learning management system is a system to create, manage, track courses that you've created that you may offer to a wide range of people. So common uses of that are onboarding, like setting up new employees and teaching them how to be an employee at your company. Other uses might be training your customers. You know, that can be a motivation is to reduce your tickets that you get from customers. It could be onboarding your customers to make sure they get the most out of your products or services. So there's a wide range of uses, and people come at this, with different motivations. For Orion, for example, they were motivated to find a learning management system like Mindflash because their product and customer base was growing really rapidly. So they were bringing in all these customers and they needed to improve the customer experience across the entire organization while servicing their rapidly growing customer base. I think what's interesting about their particular scenario is they kind of had two different phases of growth, and their KPIs reflected that. Initially, their KPIs were centered around customer onboarding. It was just a situation of, we have all these people coming in, how do we get them tuned up on how to use Orion's product? How many customers can we effectively onboard in a month, and how long does it take to do so? Those are basic, but they're critical metrics to track when you're at that stage. They've been able to reduce customer onboarding time by 50% using Mindflash. So what they've done in this case is they've actually taken statistics on who's completing courses successfully, and then they tie it back to the amount of time it takes to onboard someone. And they pull that from their other systems as they move through the various phases as a customer. They tie that data together, and then they have the result that's telling them that when you take a Mindflash course, or a course is presented via Mindflash, you're able to bring people on board 50% faster. Based on that success, they've been able to build a case with their management to further expand their use of a training program. They were able to get the executive buy-in that they were looking for, and then they were kind of off and running on their grand plans of what they wanted to do with a learning management system. As they got a handle on their training program, they've grown into some more mature KPIs. The most critical of which is tying training to increased revenue and churn. So as a business, and you talk about sort of the high level motivations of the business, they're obviously, as a software company, you want to increase the revenue that's coming from your customers, and you want to reduce the number of people who cancel the service. They've been able to prove that those who take their training are likely to pay them more on a monthly basis, annual basis, and they're a lot less likely to leave. And as a result, they're confident in pushing those training offerings, knowing that it'll help them achieve their business goals. The majority of their customers at this point, and all of their new customers, have taken or are currently taking online courses as part of the onboarding process and the ongoing life cycle of being a customer of theirs. So for them, it's been very successful. And what I'll do now is I'll talk through, how to set up your metrics to be able to pull that data when the time comes for delivering training. One of the aspects of the training or of a learning management system should be reporting capabilities. So I'll talk through kind of things to think about here as you set up your reporting and really set up your account. So comparing one thing to another. What we'll see here is we have two different, we want to really set up our courses and our structure of our trainees so that we have good data to compare one section to another. So if you think about it in terms of your users, you would want to say, okay, this is group 1 of my users and this is group 2 of my users. And in a variety of examples, you can come up with some thoughts on what that may be. If you're training customers, very obviously it's one customer versus another. So you want to be able to segment your users to know who's customer A versus customer B. It can also be, if you're just tracking your actual courses themselves, it could be, how do we assess the performance of one course versus another, or one trainer versus another. And it's not necessarily a situation of, oh, this course is a disaster, we have to get rid of it, but it's how do you improve it? Then you can take the aspects that work from one course and apply them to another course. Same with, groups of users. I mean, if you have one user that is particularly successful, or one company, that if you're doing company or product training that's particularly successful using your product, what have you done with that group? And can you tie the successful results of their training to the success with your product? A lot of times product usage is a metric that you want to tie it to. The next thing that I'm going to talk about here is assessing over time. So this is really important, and is, one of the answers that was given in a previous poll was, we want to be able to prove, higher within our organization that training is successful and that we're doing a good job with it. And how you do that, or a primary way to do that, is assess your training over time. It's really important that you've chosen a tool, or the tool that you have chosen has the ability to show you, in January of last year, we did X number of course completions, and in January of this year, we did 2x the number of course completions. It could be as simple things like course completions. It could be the score that people are achieving. Basically, what you're showing is, over time, we're increasing the amount of training that we're doing because we've been successful in tying it to our various KPIs. Another common metric that we see a lot in this space is the amount of time people spend doing training. If you're able to link it, the success of your program, to the amount of training that people receive, so they're able to sell more as a reseller because they've taken more training, then obviously one of your main motivations is, can I get people into more training, spend more time doing training so that they can sell more in the future? There are various ways that you can automate this. So it was very clear that most people are doing this in Excel. That is absolutely common. And to be quite honest, I think that's a very great place to start. There are some more sophisticated, more complicated ways of doing this, but there's really two things that are very simple with automation that you should consider, and one is certainly more simple than the other. The first is emailing of the scheduled reports or scheduling of those reports. So this is something that is really important just because it's a reminder. I mean, Natia mentioned before, writing down what your KPIs make you more likely to achieve them. Setting up your reports, so like your customized report, and then having it sent to you or being prompted that this report is available. So maybe every Friday you get the same report and you can compare it over time, or monthly it sends you the report. This is really important. It's something that, you save the time of having to go back and recreate all of these reports on a regular basis, but also you just don't have to worry about, was it taken at the right time? Did I run the report at the right time? Do I have the data? It's there in your email. You can go back, you can just grab that spreadsheet that was sent to you, and you can pull the info out. So super easy to do, and will help you kind of keep on track to maintaining all of this. The next thing that you could do to automate a lot of this, which is definitely more sophisticated, but can help a lot with this, is using an API. An API is a way for one software system to talk to another. In this example that we're talking about here, an API can pull data from a learning management system, and it can put it into another system. So you want to run your reporting in Salesforce. Potentially your training results could be sent into Salesforce, and you can run those reports directly in Salesforce, where the other data that you want to tie it to for your KPIs or to assess your KPIs lives. Another one that we see that's very common is pulling that data and putting it into a business intelligence system that houses the data for the entire organization. And that tends to be larger organizations that are very software dependent. That's a common scenario, but that's not a very difficult thing to do. To pull that data together, you will need engineers or people that can write code to do that, but it's not a crazy task for people that are capable of doing that, and will really give you a lot of insight. And more importantly, you've got your data in the same place. That said, as I mentioned, the most common place that we see this happening is in Excel. And there's nothing wrong with that. We use that a lot, and there are a lot of very powerful things that you can do in Excel to tie this information together. So basically, you'd be pulling data out of your learning management system that says these are the people that have taken the courses, these are the rates, the passing rates. Maybe it has the grouping that you're looking for if you want to tie it to a customer, for example. And then you've got another report that you're running in another system, call it your order management system, that's pulling out the actual sales data. So you can tie that together to say, okay, the companies that did a lot of training in the learning management system also are buying a lot from us. And there are very easy ways to tie that together in Excel and then get to the data that you're looking for. So those are just some of the thoughts that we have on, how to structure this. I mean, it's certainly something that I would encourage you, regardless of the learning management system you choose, or if you choose Mindflash, reach out to the person, your contact at that business, and talk through in the early stages, these are what my KPIs are, or this is what I'm trying to prove out, or this is my hypothesis. How do I set everything up so that I can assess that when all is said and done, or a couple months down the road, I can say, okay, am I on track? Is this working? So with that, I think we're going to move on into the next phase here of our webinar, and I will turn it back to Natia.
Thank you. Okay, so at this time, if you have questions that you haven't entered into the chat, this is a great time to ask any questions, and we will respond to them as they come in. So we have one question already, which is around what if you have your sales data in one location and you also have training data in a separate location? How can you pull them together?
Yeah, so I'll head that up. I tackled that a little bit in the last one. I think Excel is your friend in this scenario. I'm assuming that there's not someone who's running a database of all of the business information within your organization. If you're asking that question, which is very common. But if that's the case, then Excel is probably the best way to do that. Typically, what you'd want to do is you want to run the report in your order system and then one out of your learning management system, drop them into the same spreadsheet, and then you can create a bunch of formulas that sort of tie the revenue to the people that are taking courses or the group of people that are taking courses. It's not super sophisticated to do that, or I mean, it's not super difficult to do that. The thing with Excel is there's a ton of great resources online that'll help you do that. And basically you're using some aggregating functions or summary functions in order to pull that together.
Okay, thank you. Um, so there's another question around how do you know what type of chart to use for a particular type of data? And I think I will take a stab at this from my end. This is a really good question, and it's a question that I actually worked with a lot when I got started with having to prepare data because I am more of a creative person and I enjoy words rather than numbers. So it was actually a little bit more of an exercise of it was an exercise and a major effort for me to actually learn how to select the right types of charts. So I think the one thing, number one, again, Google is your friend, but I also leaned heavily on a couple of people who I knew who were really data savvy to help me identify some of those things. But I think that there are some really logical things that you can think of. For example, if it is a comparison, things like a bar chart where you can show two sets of data against one another might be something useful. You might also have, if you have where you are showing a proportion or a portion of the data, you may want to use something like a pie chart, or even if it's a little bit more of a spread of data, you might have one of the donut charts. And there's so many different ones that I think you can take a look at some of the ones that are offered up in the PowerPoint templates. And also, again, just take a look on Google and search for some of those different types of charts and what the purpose of those charts is used to convey, what data it's used to convey. Um, so, Jason, there's one more for you, and the question is, would I need IT to use a learning management system?
You should not need IT to use a learning management system. They're relatively straightforward to use. There is a lot of varying complexity um, across different systems, but I think the most important thing to kind of assess when you go into this is, do I have IT resources? If the answer is no, then I think that informs some of your decisions. And I would just go talk to them. Find a few that are in, that suggest that they solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Go talk to them. Go look at their software, have them show you how to use it, ask for a free trial. That's always a good plan. And just use it. I think in many cases you should be able to create courses quickly, even if it's just a sort of silly course on, how to clean the kitchen or something like that. Send it to someone and figure out whether or not that's going to meet the mark. In terms of like creating content and things like that, there are a lot of tools out there to do that sort of stuff. A very common and very often used products that's successful in doing this is PowerPoint. You can do a lot with PowerPoint. Put some narration over it. All those are options in most learning management systems. And then, make sure you have the reporting you need on the back end to assess whether or not you're successful. But yeah, you should be able to do it, just like you are any other business software. It should be easy to use, and you should be able to get the data that you need.
And just before we close, I'll just add to that last statement, Jason, that we just actually found out that we ranked in the top 20 again for Capterra, and it's for ease of use. And if you want to find out how our learning management system works, you can request a demo or you can actually take a tour on our website. And also, you can trial it yourself. So, we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you are interested in learning more, you will have links to book a time to get started, and you can try Mindflash for free. Thanks again so much, and we look forward to hosting you on our next webinar. Have a great holiday season. Take care until next time.